For an indie visual novel, Goodbye Volcano High has managed to capture a surprisingly large audience. The natural question is what this game is doing differently from other visual novels to become popular, and the answer is intrigue. The price tag was announced 6 days before release, and the original demo from Ludonarracon was pulled, leaving only the second one. But the intrigue of the game runs far deeper and far closer to its initial reveal on June 11th of 2020. The day after, the head writer, Kate Gray, apologized for making a Kotaku article containing an illicit image of an underaged Emma Watson.
No one out-pizzas the Hut.
In response, the development team scrubbed her name from the game and decided to take the story in an entirely new direction, delaying the game from its planned 2021 release into sometime in 2022. The first out of a few delays the game would experience. It's noteworthy that aside from a few Reset-era threads and a Holy Mother of Yuri article, nobody cared too much at the time, until articles by more popular publications came out the following year. This was due in part to the school Super Soaker meme, which we'll get into later. The next trailer to drop was in November 2021. It announced the release was going to be in the summer of 2023. May 4th rolls around with Ludonarracon, a game expo where narrative-heavy games are displayed and promoted. During this convention, Co-op finally decides to release a demo of their game, giving players a feel for the game. The game streamlines character relationships by using a clever solar system visual, giving a metric for how close the protagonist is to all of them. It's also fully voice-acted while using rigs to animate the characters in every scene, while still keeping its 2D aesthetic instead of using traditional stills. So it's perfect for people who have a hard time reading and focusing on imagining specific expressions. Symbolizing the end of high school as the end of the world is a bit on the nose, but there are a few better ways to put yourself in the shoes of a teenager in that same situation. The meteor is where the concerns for the game arise. A game people compare to GVH is Life is Strange, a game that had choices that ended up being completely inconsequential, due to the ending being a choice between retaining only one relationship you've built up over the course of a game or undoing everything that you've built up. The concern is that the world is going to end either way, instead of suffering the consequences of the player's actions or reaping the benefits of them. This is why visual novels tend to have many different endings, especially when they have a good, neutral, and bad ending for the same route. It's a way of signaling to the player that, though their ultimatums do matter a great deal, their seemingly minuscule choices can snowball into having an effect on the overall outcome. The meteor crashing would be even more disappointing considering the relationship system is portrayed as something for the player to ponder, and having the crash would be a waste of a visually interesting system. But I can only hope that this is the direction the new team is straying away from. The rhythm game segments are fine, but I see no reason for the X button prompts to be all over the place other than looking like Osu or Whack-A-Mole. It's not tasking by any means either. The game was delayed from July to August during Ludonarracon due to the prevalent amount of bugs that were even present in the IGN trailer. I didn't record this, but the first rhythm scene in the demo ended up overlapping the preceding scene, confusing the hell out of me when I started playing it. Various character models would have clipping mouths and eyeballs, which the dev team posted jokingly on their Twitter account, and the question marks in the text would sometimes be replaced with apostrophes. I find it commendable that they are willing to release a demo that's bugged for the sake of having a broad player base find these bugs, as well as delay the release to avoid the crunch time and maximize profits by not having to compete with the Steam Summer Sale. In a world of half-baked releases, clarity on the status of a product's rawness is welcome with open arms. My issue, however, is that the game is a visual novel. Bugged rigs make sense since having in-engine animations are quite messy, especially when you add the option to skip dialogue. The bug I personally experienced first at the start of the game was due to transitioning, something that's very easy to get past testing. But having question marks instead of apostrophes in a game whose main draw is its writing is baffling to me. That aside, it technically doesn't affect gameplay. What does, however, is being locked out of a dialogue choice in a visual novel with multiple endings despite there not being a manual save feature, at least in the demo, forcing the player to choose between two options they may not have wanted when there was a third one that would have been preferred. This can be fixed if co-op adds a manual save in the final release, but I ain't holding my breath. As I said earlier, I do think it's important to let your audience get a taste of how buggy a game is, and be crystal clear about it before release. But Goodbye Volcano High falls short of this. August 20th marks the last day that the original spec requirements of the game were on Steam. Even a few benchmark sites have the original in the Google description to corroborate this. 2GB of RAM, no GPU, 2GB of storage, and a 1.1 GHz CPU to run. Though the benchmark site does say that a GeForce 510 GPU is there, so let's be a bit charitable. At the absolute earliest, August 20th is when the specs were changed to 8GB of RAM with a 960 and 4GB of VRAM. 5GB of storage, and an i5 with 3.0 GHz as its clock speed to run. The CPU jumped almost 3 times, the memory, including VRAM, jumped almost 6 times, and the storage more than doubled, though 3GB is negligible these days. Nevertheless, giving your audience any sliver of hope that there are any attempts at optimization until a week before release is more befitting of a AAA studio. The ones who had to burn enough bridges to replace the entire American interstate 3 times over before they got called out on it. Consumers should have known about how poorly optimized the demos were, but Co-op left up the wrong system requirements for over a month after the second demo was out before correcting it. I tried to record specific footage of instances, but it was more convenient to take someone else's since it ran worse than when I tried having Atomic Heart recorded on OBS. The lack of care when it comes to fixing the technical errors becomes even more frustrating when you consider the dev team had at least 3 years of development. In a time frame that wide, there have been multiple indie titles to make a splash, such as the fellow visual novel entitled Snoot Game. Time to open that can of worms. I mentioned how interest in the game only picked up in summer of 2021, but
I lied.
and neglected to mention that this game was the main reason why. It was made as a free-to-play parody game by anonymous 4chan users as a criticism of the queer theming of the source material, and almost became as popular as its source material, with the school Super Soaker meme becoming more well-known to people than any other information about Goodbye Volcano High. The studio making Goodbye Volcano High responds to this increase in publicity by taking the game off itch.io and having Kotaku write a hit piece on the game. This, naturally, gained a lot more sympathy for the Snoot devs and less for Co-op. The average wage for a worker on their dev team is $80K in Canadian a year. Snoot was made in 1 year and the developers got paid in toenail clippings and peanut shells. Well, these guys made $60K in Eagle Bucks for 3 years at the very least, meaning the cost was around the ballpark of $1.8 million due to their 10 employees. $1.8 million to spend. And they're the ones being bullied by the people who don't have question marks instead of apostrophes. Cavemen on the Snoot Studio were motivated enough to either draw or commission porn of multiple of the game's characters before it was even released. They were careful enough to read the description of each character and make a parody of all of them, when Co-op didn't even realize that the band in their game had 2 bassists playing. They have rhythm segments that are supposed to emphasize a character, while using visuals that drag the player's eyes all across the screen and away from the character. It's like they don't even have respect for the artistic work involved in creating the product that they want to sell you. For all its flaws, Snoot has a message about reaching out to those who you may perceive as polar opposite to you, since you may find some common ground with them, as well as learn to respect the amount of passion they put in their projects. I can't exactly say that Co-op has a similar message, especially with their Kotaku hit piece.